Let me tell you a story that happened many thousands of years ago,
said Revelation. They walked along the north transept of the church, coming to a set of spiral stairs that led to the upper cloisters. Revelation followed after Uriah, talking as he climbed.
It is a story of how a herd of gene-bred livestock caused the death of over 900 people.
Did they stampede? Asked Uriah.
No, it was a handful of half-starved creatures that escaped from their paddocks outside Zoza, a once great city of the Nord-Afric conclaves.
They reached the top of the stairs and began walking along the cloister, its confined walls dark and cold. Dust lay thick on the stone-flagged floor, and a handful of thick candles that Uriah could not remember lighting guttered in iron sconces. "Zozer? I've been there," said Uriah. "At least, I saw what my guide told me were its ruins."
Quite possibly. Anyway, these hungry animals walked through a building holy to one of the many cults that called Zoza home. This cult, which was known as the Zozerites, believed that gene-bred meat was an affront to their god, and they blamed a rival sect known as the Upashta for the defilement. The Zozerites went on a rampage, stabbing and clubbing any Upashta they could find. Of course, the Upashta retaliated, and rioting spread through the city and left close to 1,000 people dead.
"Is there any point to that story?" said Uriah, when Revelation did not continue.
Absolutely. It tells a universal tale, and typifies religious behavior that has been recurring since the beginning of human history.
"A slightly far-fetched example, Revelation. One freakish story cannot serve as a proof that belief in the divine is a bad thing. Such belief is the bedrock of moral order. It gives people the character they need to get through life. Without guidance from above, the world would descend into anarchy."
Sadly, millions once held that view, Uriah. But that old truism is just not true. The record of human experience shows that where religion is strong, it causes cruelty. Intense beliefs produce intense hostility. Only when faith loses its force can a society hope to become humane.
"I don't believe that," said Uriah, stopping by one of the arches in the cloister and looking down onto the nave. Dust swirled across the floor, blown by the storm winds chasing around the lonely church. "My holy book gives instruction on how to live a good life. It has lessons humanity needs."
Are you sure?
asked Revelation.
I have read your holy book, and much of it is bloody and vengeful. Would you live your life literally by its commandments, or do you view the people who populate its pages as exemplars of proper behavior? Either way, I suspect the morals espoused would be horrifying to most people.
Uriah shook his head. "You're missing the point, Revelation. Much of the text is not meant to be taken literally. It is symbolic or allegorical." Revelation snapped his fingers.
That is exactly my point. You pick and choose which bits of your book to take literally and which to read as symbolic, and that choosing is a matter of personal decision, not divinity. Trust me, in ages past, a frightening number of people took their holy books deadly serious, causing untold misery and death because they truly believed the words that they read, word for bloody word. The history of religion is a horror story, Uriah. If you doubt it, just look at what humanity has done in the name of their gods over the millennia. Thousands of years ago, a bloody theocracy that venerated a feathered serpent god rose in the Mayan jungles. To appease this abysmal god, its priests drowned maidens in sacred wells and cut out the hearts of children. They believed this serpent god had an earthly counterpart, and the temple builders drove the first pile through a maiden's body to pacify this non-existent creature.
Uriah turned to Revelation in horror and said, "You can't seriously compare my religion to heathen barbarism."
Can't I?
Countered Revelation.
In the name of your religion, a holy man launched a war with the battle cries of Deus Vult, which means God wills it, in one of the ancient tongues of old Earth. His warriors were charged with destroying enemies in a far-off kingdom, but first they fell upon those in their own lands who opposed the war. Thousands were dragged from their homes and hacked to death, or burned alive. Then, satisfied their homeland was secure, the zealous legions plundered their way thousands of miles to the holy city they were to liberate. Upon reaching it, they killed every inhabitant to purify the symbolic city of taint. I remember one of their leaders saying that he rode up in blood, up to the knees, and even to his horse's bridle, by the just and marvelous judgment of God.
"That is ancient history," said Uriah. "You cannot vouchsafe the truth of events so lost in the mists of time."
If it were one event, I might agree with you,
replied Revelation.
But just 100 years or so later, another holy man declared war on a sect of his own church. His warriors laid siege to the sect's stronghold in ancient Frank, and when the city fell, his generals asked their leader how they might tell the faithful from the traitor among the captives. This man who followed your God ordered the warriors to, and I quote, "Kill them all, God will know his own." Nearly 20,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered. Worst of all, the hunt for any that had escaped the siege led to the establishment of an organization known as the Inquisition, a dreadful, monstrous plague of hysteria that gave its agents free rein to stretch, burn, pierce, and break their victims on fiendish pain machines to force them to confess, to disbelief, and identify fellow transgressors. Later, with most of their enemies hunted down and killed, the Inquisition shifted its focus to witchcraft, and priests tortured untold thousands of women into confessing that they had engaged in unnatural acts with demons. They were then burned or hanged for their confessions, and this hysteria raged for 3 centuries in a dozen nations, a madness that saw whole towns exterminated and over 100,000 dead.
"You pick the most extreme examples from the past, Revelation," said Uriah, struggling to maintain his composure in the face of such tales of murder and bloodshed. "Times have moved on, and humanity no longer behaves in such ways to one another."
If you believe that, if you truly believe that, then you have been shut away in this draughty church for far too long, Uriah,
said Revelation.
You must have heard of Cardinal Tang, a mass-murdering ethnarch who practiced a crude form of eugenics. His bloody pogroms and death camps saw millions dead in the Indonesian bloc. He died less than 30 years ago after seeking to return the world to a pre-technological age, emulating the Inquisition's burning of scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers who contradicted the Church's view on cosmology.
Uriah could stand no more and walked towards the stairs at the far end of the cloister that led down into the narthex. You fixate on blood and death, Revelation. You forget all the good that can be achieved through faith.
And if you think religion is a force for good, Uriah, then you're not seeing the superstitious savagery that pervades the history of our world,
said Revelation.
It's true that just before the descent of Old Night, religion gradually lost its power over life. But like the worst of poison, it lingered and fostered division amongst the people of the world that endured. Without belief of gods, divisions blur with passing ages. New generations adapt to new times, mingle, intermarry, and forget ancient wounds. It is only belief in gods and divine entities that keep them alien to one another, and anything that divides people breeds inhumanity. Religion is the canker in mankind's heart, and serves such an ugly purpose.
Enough! Snapped Uriah. I have heard enough. Yes, people have done terrible things to one another in the name of their gods. But they have done terrible things to one another without the recourse to their beliefs. An acceptance of gods and an afterlife is a vital part of what makes us who we are. If you take away that from humanity, what do you suggest takes its place? In my many years as a priest, I have ministered to many dying people, and the emotional benefits of religion's power to console them and those left behind cannot be underestimated.
There is a flaw in your logic, Uriah,
said Revelation.
Religion's power to console gives it absolutely no more credence or validity. It might very well be a comfort to a dying man to believe that he will go to some bountiful paradise of endless joy, but even if he dies with a wonderful smile on his face, it means nothing in the grand scheme of things as far as the truth of the matter is concerned.
Maybe not, but when my time comes, I will die with my God's name on my lips.
Are you afraid to die, Uriah?
Asked Revelation. No.
Truly?
Truly, said Uriah. I have had my share of sins, but I have spent my life in the service of my God, and I believe that I have served him faithfully and well.
So why is it then, when you go to these people who are dying and clinging to their beliefs, that they do not welcome the end of their own lives? Surely the gathered family and friends should be of good cheer, and should celebrate their relatives' passing. After all, if eternal paradise awaits on the other side, why are they not filled with gleeful anticipation? Could it be that, in their heart of hearts, they don't really believe it?
Uriah turned away and made his way down the narthex stairs. His anger and frustration giving him force of pace that quite outweighed the stiffness in his limbs. A cold wind blew in from the outer doors, and he could hear the mutter of voices and the scrape of metal on metal from outside. The narthex of the Church of the Lightning Stone was an austere place. Stone walls with niches in which sat statues of various saints that had passed away in the thousands of years the church had stood. A swaying candelabra, empty of candles, hung from the roof, but it had been many years since Uriah had been able to climb the stepladder in the storeroom to replace them. He pushed open the door to the church and walked stiffly down the nave towards the altar. 4 of the 6 candles he had lit there had gone out, and the 5th guttered and died in the wind that entered with him. The lone candle burned beside the clock, and Uriah made his way towards it as he heard Revelation enter the church behind him. Uriah reached the altar and lowered himself to a kneeling position. with some difficulty. He bowed his head before the altar and clasped his hands together. "The Lord of mankind and the way, all his actions are for the benefit of mankind, which is his people. So it is taught in the holy words of our order, and above all things, God will protect."
There's no one to hear you,
said Revelation from behind him. "I don't care what you say anymore. You have come here to do what you feel you need to do, and I'll not buttress your ego and self-righteousness by playing along any longer. So just end this charade."
as you wish. As you wish.
said Revelation.
No more games.
A golden light built behind Uriah, and he saw his shadow thrown out onto the graven surface of the altar. The pearlescent hands of the clock shimmered in the reflected light, and the ebony face gleamed. Where once the church had been gloomy and filled with shadows, it was now a place of light. Uriah pulled himself to his feet and turned to see a wondrous figure standing before him, towering and magnificent, clad in golden armor fashioned with love and the greatest skill, every plate embossed with thunderbolts and eagles. Gone was Revelation, and in this place was a towering warrior of exquisite splendor, an exemplar of all that was regal and inspirational in humanity. The armor bulked his form out beyond measure, and Uriah felt tears filling from his eyes when he had realized he had seen this breathtakingly, achingly perfect face once before, on the killing fields of Gauder. "You!" breathed Uriah, stumbling back and collapsing onto his haunches. Pain shot through his hip and pelvis, but he barely felt it.
Now do you understand the futility of what you do here?
Said the golden giant. Long, dark hair spilled around the warrior's face, a face that Uriah could only see through the hazy lens of memory. He could see the unremarkable features of Revelation subsumed into the warrior's countenance, itself so worthy of devotion that it took all Uriah's self-control not to drop to his knees and offer what remained of his life to its glorification. "You!" repeated Uriah, the pain in his bones no match for the pain in his heart. "You are the Emperor."
I am, and it is time to go, Uriah,
said the Emperor.